Good afternoon and welcome to our Meet the Funders session. We're looking at community consultations as part of our 2022 workshops. So I'm going to begin by just sharing some slides with you. Okay, so we're going to start off by looking at the different types of community consultations that you might do, thinking about the different ways in which you might engage with the community and just run through some of those ideas. So afterwards, there should be a resource list available through Transformation Cornwall, which will have the links to some of these resources as well. So the first question I would like to ask is, are you really prepared to listen? It sounds like such an easy thing, and that's why we're asking. But listening is actually very challenging. And if you haven't got the answer that you're looking for, it can feel a bit like criticism in many ways. I like to share a story of a member of clergy from our diocese who went into a school once and asked the children what has a bushy tail and lives in trees. One of the children answered, Jesus. The answer was in fact a squirrel. You probably guessed it correctly, but the child said that because they were a vicar, they must be here to talk about Jesus. And it rings true with me in terms of consultation, because often we're so ready to think we have the answer to things that we don't listen to what people are actually saying to us. So the question before you begin is, do you think you've solved the problem? And are you really ready to take on board other people's thoughts and suggestions, even when they're different from your own? Often when you think of doing a consultation, the first thing that comes to mind is a community survey, which can be quite labour intensive and not necessarily yield many results. But there are lots of different ways in which you can do community consultations. I've got some of these listed here and I'll run through some of those, but again, there's further detail on the resource sheet. So there is the community mapping idea. We've used that quite a lot in some of the on the way processes that I've been involved with, actually to have a map of the community and to really see the different areas there, to identify the key buildings in that place where people are, and to think about how that relates to the project you're doing. So really think about what might be impacted by your project. People might use post-it notes or different things to feedback on certain things and to pop those on the map so that you can see them visually. Similarly, Planning for Real is a trademarked program that can be used. Sometimes councils have access to that, and it is a kind of planning tool, as it says in the title of it. So it has a 3D model of an area, and there's opportunity for people to feedback and input on cards and things like that to answer specific questions, to get a specific point of view across, and to think about those things. That one is one that you normally have to pay for, so it's quite an expense, can be quite an expensive option, but if you're looking at doing a planning thing, then that might be the right thing for you. A public meeting or forum is another way of getting some feedback. So one of the downfalls with that is that you often get only the interested people, and actually you try and want to get a range of people's perspectives. So people that are invested in it are likely to come along. It may be difficult to get feedback from people that aren't so confident in that sort of forum. They might not feel able to speak in front of people. So although it's one way of getting feedback, you definitely need to look at something else as well. But it's a good way for kind of generating ideas and talking through and understanding and listening. Sometimes people write a comment on a feedback. You only got that comment to go from, whereas actually in a public meeting or a forum, then you can kind of question that a bit and get some further detail on that so that you understand one another a bit better. Workshops and focus groups are again similar ways of doing it, and it's something that I'd perhaps look at if we weren't too far down the route of thinking we've solved the problem. So we might identify what the problem is and then actually use some of those workshops or focus groups to speak with interested people, to speak with those that might be engaged with it, and to kind of come up with a range of views on how we might address the problem. And that saves you from having that kind of very often the tunnel vision idea of how to solve it because you've had a limited group of people. who are thinking about the solutions. So that is one way forward, and the focus groups can perhaps be different service users of a particular organisation. If you're looking at a village hall or things like that, you might have different perspectives from those groups, which could be quite diverse as to why they need the village hall and the sorts of resources and facilities that they need there. Questionnaires and surveys are obviously on there. They are a good way of doing a survey, and they're kind of the standard way. Some of the things you might need to think about is, do you have it in an understandable format? Do your questions make sense? Can people fill it in online? Are you going to do it over the phone? What do you think with the sort of return of the surveys? Postage is very expensive now. It might be quite a lot to put a stamped addressed envelope in with each one. Especially considering that the return rate is often quite low. If you're in a small community, maybe you've got collection boxes in different shops or things so people can return their surveys. Or you might even try doing it at an event. I've been to some events where people have kind of done a survey on a clipboard very successfully, because they're literally kind of grabbing people and you've got, this is going to take 2 or 3 minutes. Please, could you just answer these questions? And they can ask further questions again about what people mean by something. So again, you're not quite stuck with just the simple answer that they've given, having written it down. Online is another key area. You might be using social media. You might want to take screenshots of likes or comments that you may have on Facebook or Instagram. Might be opportunity for people to engage with that. They might want to comment on how they see it happening, offering support. They might be able to share it, so you get quite a wide audience. You might be able to use sort of the community groups that are available on those platforms in order to share it wider to a group of people that wouldn't necessarily also engage with the other methods. So again, it's about looking at ways in which you can meet different people, because what you want to have is a variety of views and opinions on what you're doing, and not just people that think like you, however reassuring that might be. Street stalls are another good way of doing it. So if you're in a community, you might want to have a stall in the street or at a summer fair or something like that, and use that for people to input their feedback, sometimes with kind of sticky dots or something, different coloured dots. We saw that a lot during Brexit. People, where are people thinking of voting? What are the issues that are affecting them in that? It gives people an opportunity to see where others are thinking without it being too personal. So it gives them an idea of what the general feeling is. So that's a good way of doing it. I've put on here again, arts and creativity. It's really important that everything isn't just a kind of written format for people that engage well with written things. There's lots of ways you can do different arts and creativity in terms of consultation, and I'd encourage you to be as creative as you can. Some of the classic things are encouraging people to doodle something, or to put something on a graffiti wall, maybe to have disposable cameras at an event where they take pictures of things that are important to them in the community. Could be some sort of vox pox recordings of different people's perspectives that might be used, songs, poems, artwork. Just thinking back over the last couple of years, we've had a few sort of street parties, sometimes using the placemats for people to scribble feedback onto the placemats or doodle something. I'm kind of giving you a very broad brush overview there, but I'd really encourage you to be as creative as you can. And if there is someone creative in your group, then encourage them to think about how they might engage with people. Particularly younger people as well might find that an easier way to engage. Okay, so the other side of that is, why would people engage? We've talked a little bit about people having an interest in it, so they've got a vested interest. When you see planning developments coming up, often people that live nearby will engage in that process because they have a vested interest in whether housing is built near them. But if there's not that, what is there that's encouraging people to engage? Is there a level of trust within the community? Are you an organisation that's kind of parachuting in to do something, or are you there, present in the community, committed to it, and you have connections within that community? So think about what your community looks like. Is it a geographical community? Is it a community of interest? Where does it fit? And where are the ways in which you're connected fully with that community? Some people might use things like a prize or a hook for engagement. So it might be that every survey that's returned is entered into a prize draw and somebody wins a £25 voucher or something like that. Those are quite simple ways of doing it. If you're engaging with children, it might be that they get a sweet once they've done it. That's probably not great in terms of healthy eating, but there could be something along those lines. Think about also the barriers to people engaging. You've thought about, it's easy to think about how you might engage with something, how you might respond, but thinking about it from somebody else's perspective, what might the barrier be? If you're meeting at a certain time to get feedback, is that a time that's good for parents or good for children? Is the building that you're meeting in accessible to people if they're in a wheelchair, or they have a pushchair or something like that? Is it warm for them? Are the facilities there, like toilets, so that if they come to do something that they're not then stuck there? Do they have to get a bus or some sort of public transport to get to where you're doing the engagement? Are you expecting them to put a stamp on the envelope to return it? Do people have access to the internet? Do people feel comfortable doing things on the internet and responding in that way? So thinking about all of those things. And a really important one is, do people have the confidence to respond? Do people feel able to respond in that way? If it's something that just makes them feel a bit uncomfortable, they probably won't engage with that. And so it's important that you think about what the basic level of understanding is and how you explain that with people. So I've got an example here of, are you on the same page? I'm not sure what you can see in that picture. You might immediately see a hare, you might see a duck, and I don't know, maybe you see something else entirely. But making sure that you're at the same starting point as those other people is really important in this process. If you end up trying to solve a problem when you're both going at it from different angles, but actually trying to achieve the same thing, that can cause problems. So making sure that you understand one another and you have a basic level of knowledge. We talk a little bit about, when we're writing funding applications, to know your funder and to think about the level of knowledge that they have. If you're working with a funder in Cornwall, you can probably assume that they know what Cornwall is like. If you're working with a funder that's based in London, they might not have such a good knowledge of what Cornwall's like. They might have that picture of Cornwall being sunny and ice creams and lovely, and they might not know the reality perhaps in winter or the seasonality of it. So it's important that you furnish the people that you're asking for the feedback with the right level of knowledge. Don't assume that they have a level of knowledge that you have because you've been engaged with the project from the beginning. Think about the language you're using, whether it's accessible, and check it for mistakes, or get somebody else to check it for mistakes, even better, because it's very easy, isn't it, to read what you think you've written as opposed to what you have actually written. So another one here, do you see 3 or 4 planks of wood or staves of wood there in the picture? Just really making sure that you understand that you're all working from the same point and that you're clear. Just a little bit here on those sorts of questions that don't achieve the answers that we want them to. It's very easy to put in buzzwords in questionnaires or surveys, or to think about what it is you want to get out of it and not to think about how people might respond. It's so important to think about how things will land with people, how they will naturally respond to it. So, do you have any comments? Not a great one, it's very vague. And that can be challenging for people. It can either mean that they put something really off the wall down, or they might not have any idea what it is that you're expecting them to put down. Also, there's a trust element there, because if you say, do you have any comments, and someone says, actually, I think the answer to this is putting in X, Y, and Z, and you have absolutely no resources to put in X, Y, and Z, then you can be fairly sure that when anything goes wrong, they'll say, oh, well, I had the answer and I told them that the answer was X, Y, and Z, and they didn't do anything about it. And you need, if people are putting in any other comments, you need a way of feeding back to them and discussing that with them. The church is the focal point of the community, yes or no? Again, that's a really challenging one. What does that mean? What do you mean by focal point? Do you mean, is it geographically recognizable within the community? Do you mean it's the place where everybody goes, the meeting point? Is it the only thing in the community? Well, it doesn't answer the question. It's not an easy question to answer and to know that you're on the same page. This is a classic one. Would it be good to have a local village shop? People might say yes, but that doesn't necessarily answer the question that you want it to answer. And we'll go on to that a bit more in a moment. Again, what facilities should we provide for young people in the community? It's very, very open. If they say a swimming pool and you've got no way of providing a swimming pool and you're thinking of something like a youth club, that's really difficult because you're actually saying no to them and you're not giving them any sort of outline as to what it is they could be looking for. You might want to give them options. What would be best, or what would you rate on a scale of 1 to 3? Which would you prefer? Would you attend them? Those sorts of things. And then this last one about, we understand many people are struggling with the cost of living crisis. Should we make more allotments available for families? I just think in those sorts of situations when you're coming in with a solution to a problem and you're not necessarily the one experiencing the problem, that it's really important we check our privilege and think about what it is that we have access to that others might not have access to. And that's a really classic one there around would that be a real solution to the problem or not? So in terms of, so I'm just going to go back there a bit, but things like that, would it be good to have a local village shop? That doesn't mean people will use the village shop. You might want to ask, would you use a local village shop? You might want to ask, what are the sorts of things you'd purchase in a local village shop? You might want to ask, would you be prepared to volunteer in a village shop? Or what are the things that would make you purchase something there or not? So would it be dependent on price? Would it be dependent on the weight of the project or the range of products that they have? And the kind of check your privilege one on the allotments as well. Think about the things that are needed if people are struggling with the cost of living crisis. To set up an allotment is really expensive. They're going to need a shed, they're going to need tools, they're going to need the seeds, they're going to need to grow the vegetables or fruit and have the skills to do that. And what happens if they don't grow or you get a bad crop? That's going to really badly affect those people. There was a thread on Twitter a while ago about checking privilege with cost of living, and the lady that was writing it had said she'd been to her local supermarket and found some veg that was kind of going out of date, and she'd taken it home and she'd made soup, and she'd reflected on the fact that this is exactly the sort of cooking people say those that are using food banks should do, this sort of batch cooking. And she said, but actually I was able to just drive to my local supermarket and happened to pick up that veg that was going off. I didn't have to take a bus and pay for the bus to get there and carry it back. I then got home and I had the things in my cupboard, like the stock cubes and the other ingredients that I could use to do that. Whereas actually people might not have those base ingredients to start it with. She then said, I had a blender at home that I was able to use to blend the soup. I was able to pay for the electric to let it cook, because often soup has to cook for quite a long time on the stove. I had a freezer in which I could freeze the other batches of the soup so I could use it for other meals. And actually, most importantly, if it had gone really badly wrong, I had other food to eat. So again, thinking about the allotments and thinking about those sorts of solutions, how do we check our privilege and make sure that we're not assuming that people have the same access to things as we do? It's really important, if we're looking to solve a problem in a community, that we're engaged with that community that are experiencing the problem. We may be experiencing it alongside them. Still important to engage with other people in that forum, because they may have other ways of engaging it than we do. So yes, things to consider. Asking others to read the question first, asking people how they would read it and how they would respond. Is that giving the sort of answer that you're looking for, or is it giving an answer to a question you didn't think you'd ask? That's quite important. Thinking about those different methods of response. You're not just going for one way of getting engagement from people and one way of getting feedback. You want to get different ways. What doesn't the question ask? So that village shop example, would it be good to have a village shop? It doesn't ask for things about, would you use the village shop? What would be the things that made you use it or not? Would you volunteer there? How would price impact whether you used it? It doesn't ask those wider questions. Is the question detailed enough or too vague? We've covered that a couple of times. If it's too vague, it's very difficult for people to respond because they don't have a point of reference as to what it is you're asking. And it builds again that suspicion of there's a lack of trust. They've given you the answer to the problem. You haven't chosen to follow that because it wasn't something within your remit to offer. So don't be too vague about things, be specific. And on that, are you offering something you'll be unable to deliver? So if you're thinking of a solution and you really don't think it's actually going to be viable to get the funding, think about the impact that has on the community, especially some of those communities that perhaps have had lots of organisations come in and deliver things that are funded perhaps for 3 years and then they withdraw. And actually people get used to that and get to know that they're not going to be there for the long term and they're a community that's done too, and it drops that level of engagement. And this is a really important one at the end. How will you communicate the results and the change? It's very easy to forget that second stage, to kind of get the feedback you need and think, great, I've got exactly what I need. I've got the evidence, I've got support for it. I can go off and write the funding bid and I can get the funding and I can deliver the project. But actually you haven't communicated to people what's happening. And so they might not make that connection that it was due to that survey that they filled in or due to that graffiti wall that they participated in that enabled that organisation or that community group to get the funding to do the work. So make sure you keep communicating that. Thank you for your feedback. We're taking it really seriously. As a result of your feedback, we've changed X, Y, and Z because we feel this meets your needs more. As a result of your feedback, we've been able to access funding for you and your projects. You know, thinking about ways in which you can communicate in lots of ways, because people don't hear that often in one way. They hear it when they've heard lots of communication about it. And there you go, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place. So again, thinking about how that lands with people, whether they've heard the message that you're trying to give is really important. So when you've done that consultation and you've gathered lots of evidence and you do think it's right to go ahead with your slightly changed project to take account of the evidence that you've gathered, use that consultation as evidence to the funders. It doesn't have to be just reproduced as here are 30 surveys that were filled in. It could be other things like we had X number of people attend this event to show that they were engaged with it. The feedback was 80% positive. Some of the things that were not so positive were, or using quotes from things that people have written down as part of the answer. Try really hard to weave the answers into a story or a case study about people, obviously making it anonymous, but funders are much more likely to fund people. So if you can explain it in a story of how it's impacted somebody's life or how it will impact somebody's life, that's much more fundable than just kind of putting in the data. We've talked a little bit about how many times you communicate. I think the level is if you communicate something 7 times, people have actually heard it. But so that's quite a lot of ways in which you're ending up having to communicate. But that communication with the community groups and the people you're engaging with is essential in building trust, even if you are part of that community group. So I've put here, get creative and have fun. These are some of the other ways in which you might want to gather some of that feedback, being as creative as you can. It could be things like using marbles in a jar, you know, put it in if you think this, or put this colour in if this is what you think. Having questions and answers that people can pick and put together, using those kind of like washing lines of feedback, particularly in a building. People can hang it up so that others can see what they've said. Even if it's anonymous. Things like beach cleans and things, that they can be used as evidence in consultation. The number of people that attended the beach clean, finding out a little bit about who they are and why why doing a beach clean is important to them, that can be something. And we talked a little bit at the beginning about that kind of community lunch and how you gather feedback at those sorts of events. Okay. So that is a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of community consultations, and I'm very happy to take questions if you would like to email me or give me a call, and we can do our best to support you in that. All of the resources from this will be available on the Transformation Cornwall website afterwards as well. Thank you very much.